Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Contraelite. It is an English language version, and today we are here with Jorge and myself, Vanessa, and we have two really interesting and amazing guests, Boyan and Maria. And before we get started, I would wanted to let you know that we're going to be talking about two countries in Eastern Europe. Bulgaria and Romania. We have two excellent guests who are going to be sharing their expert analysis with us. And let me start by thanking Boyan and Maria for joining us today and letting them say hello.
Hello, thank you for having us. It's an honor, a pleasure to be here.
Hello from me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on Contraelite.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I wanted to read a little bit about them and then we'll get on with the show. So, Boyan Stanislavski is a Bulgarian and Polish activist, journalist, editor, publisher, and translator. Woo! Yes, I love translators because I am one. Um, and in the late 90s, he was active in the Polish left and later in the labor movement, particularly in the biggest Polish labor confederation, the All Poland Trade Union Alliance, and until 2012, editor-in-chief of its weekly magazine. And he's also a contributor at Barricade.org and Strite.eu, Polish correspondent for Bulgarian National Radio, and one of you're the lead at the Barricade. Which is a multimedia project, or maybe you could tell me a tiny bit about it.
Right. So it's an English language platform which we started in 2018. That happened 2 years after we started. We had started our project Barricada.org, which is a Bulgarian left-wing media outlet, which is a tremendous success, by the way. And we thought that having established an outlet in Bulgarian and then a year later in Romanian, we might start actually translating some of our publications into English in order to provide some information for the international readers, viewers, listeners, people potentially interested in Eastern European affairs, so that we could give them more of an accurate picture of what's actually been going on there, what's going on there, because what's being reported in the the so-called media of repute internationally is, to say the least, not the most accurate interpretation and information about our region. And of course, not only, but that's what we're focusing on.
Yes, exactly. Okay, very good. And I also wanted to read a little bit more about Maria Cernat. Graduated in 2001 at the Faculty of Journalism and Communication Science of the University of Bucharest. She also graduated with from the Faculty of Philosophy in 2004 at the University of Bucharest. In 2002, she got an MA in Communication Science at the Faculty of Journalism and Communication Science. In 2008, she got her PhD in Analytical Philosophy at the University of Bucharest with a thesis examining the ontological status of events. She was an associate professor for several years at the University of Bucharest, teaching media ethics and public relations management. She's currently lecturer at the Faculty of Communication Sciences and International Relations at Titu Maiorescu University. She is also an author of several academic and journalistic articles concerning critical theory, political communication, media ethics, academic ethics, and communication science. I am so excited to have you both here.
Thank you for having us. We are excited to be here.
Great. Well, very good. Now we will go on to talking about Bulgaria. So Bulgaria, ancestral home of Dilma Rousseff, who was former president of Brazil, and always the Latin American connection here in Contraelite. Also the home of great footballer Hristo Stoichkov. That is probably the first time I ever heard of someone from Bulgaria in that World Cup. Hristo Stoichkov. Turbo folk, and the world's strongest men in various contests, and the capital is Sofia. And some of you may have heard about this country as one of the top digital nomad destinations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I have a compilation of data and little bits of information that we gathered from across the web. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was the fact that women are increasingly powerful in Bulgaria. 1/3 of the company owners and top managers of Bulgaria are women. Looking at all of the countries in the EU, Bulgaria has the largest proportion of women with university education. Women have some of the toughest jobs in the country. Regional development minister responsible for the government's goal to build the country's infrastructure, mayor of the capital of Sofia, Minister of Justice, which reforms the justice system, the Speaker of the Parliament. One day, a woman might become Minister of Defense, but for now, a woman is holding the position of Deputy Minister of Defense. Women dominate top position outside of politics as well. For example, national television, national radio channel. And in addition, women are running most of the public relations and marketing businesses in the country. Women make up 27% of Bulgaria's parliament, a much higher percentage than Czechia, Uruguay, Slovakia, Chile, Ireland, Greece, Cyprus, and virtually tied with us here in the US. And they chair 40% of the committees in parliament. This is a Balkan country with a sizable Muslim population, recognizable Ottoman past, a seeming absence of feminist movements, no political correctness, and rude macho jokes that are even published in the national press. So for us living here in the US, we just elected the first female vice president, Kamala Harris, and we have been hearing for weeks the whole discourse about make sure you're wearing your shoes, ladies, because there's glass everywhere, talking about the glass ceiling and how female representation is so important. And I think it is. But you know, it being critical thinkers, critical leftist thinkers who are not going to go for the siren song of some of this liberal kind of discourse. You know, we see it decisively in a country like Bulgaria. But what can you tell us about this? And does greater female representation in these institutions of power truly translate into feminist policies that benefit women and families? And does it manifest in a deep change in cultural norms? How does this play out in Bulgaria? And whoever wants to take it away first, please go ahead.
Right. Well, short answer to the question whether it translates itself into some kind of social progress and cultural emancipation. Short answer, no. Long answer. The problem of female representation cannot be, in my opinion, viewed only in terms of quantity and numbers, because Bulgaria is an excellent example of how, in terms exactly of quantity and numbers, things on paper seem to be looking rather good. However, if you scratch the surface, what you will see is terrible, horrendous reality for the people, for the men and women, for the Muslims, for the Christians, for the atheists, for the white Bulgarians, for the Roma people, for the Turkish minority, for the Armenian minority, and so on and so forth. So the general cultural situation definitely cannot be described as a progressive one. Unfortunately, Bulgaria, like many countries of Eastern Europe, over the past 30 years became extremely bigoted. And the reason for that is not because people are, I don't know, ignorant in comparison to those of in the West, but because what we went through, and now I'm talking about Bulgaria because it varies from country to country, okay? But in Bulgaria, what we went through for the last 3 decades was an unprecedented, absolutely disastrous civilizational downgrade. And this catastrophe, on the one hand, of course, it it had its material manifestation, the impoverishment of the society, its pauperization, the destruction of the social fabric, the destruction of the statehood to a large extent, because we really can, pose the question whether Bulgaria is a fully functioning state. Some would argue, among them myself, that it's rather a territory with some functions of a state. But that's a different question. I might take it up later. But another aspect of this civilizational downgrade was that it was this culture of despair, poverty, and panic, which in turn produced massive fear among the population. And that, of course, led to strengthening a lot of conservative traits that exist in every society. And despite the fact that, as I said in the beginning, the numbers look appealing, even spectacular, there is nothing like a successful feminist revolution, maybe. That's so I would say that what we should look into is what the situation on the ground for the for the majority of the people is, and those numbers, the statistics that you quoted, valuable as they might be, do not really describe the situation of the state and of the society. Although, of course, I understand that for those that subscribed to this liberal ideology, which I find to be pretty primitive, when you just want to discuss the number of women that are leading some companies. Well, take the example that you brought up, the mayor of Sofia. Okay, she's a woman. I think she's even a decent woman, perhaps even a sympathetic one, judging by her media appearances. The problem is that regardless of her gender, she is a terrible mayor. And what she's doing is she's helping exercise the mafia-style capitalist model in Bulgaria, installed already 30 years ago and developed, which has been developing since then, in the biggest urban center of the country, that is its capital, Sofia. And this is the essence, and this is the problem. Not whether she is a woman, a man, a transgender person, if you like, or anything like that. So the feminist movement, other progressive movements, the left, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And all those numbers that you put forward, unfortunately, as I said, as much as they might look optimistic, they're not really, they're not very helpful in terms of understanding the situation.
Okay.
Okay, just one question before Maria, just on follow-up question on that, Boyan, because by hearing your explanation, and I appreciate it, I just wanted to play devil advocate and just kind of push back in terms of, don't you think at the same time that as developing as the situation is, and it kind of reminded me of this mayor of Bogota, this woman who's also, painting herself as progressive, but if you talk about foreign politics, she's as neoliberal, as an imperialist, as the right wing Uribe in Colombia. I just wanted to know, don't you think at the same time that these developing policies that, although the numbers look great, are still not yet fully realized, and you're saying that they're representative of capitalist mafia in Bulgaria, at the same time, maybe it's comparable to what exists in the US, in that as much as progressive as they paint themselves to be, in reality, there is no so big difference in substance?
Of course, it does resemble the American situation. And if we go back to the early 90s, let's just look at some names. Who were the cadres that drew up the plan for the capitalist restoration in Bulgaria? So it was two guys, actually, two Americans, Richard Rand and Ronald Utt. Both of them high-ranking business officials and bureaucrats in George Bush's. I'm talking about the older Bush, George Bush's administration. So I would be surprised had. I would be surprised had the Bulgarian, situation not resembled, at least to some extent, the American one. But there are also some major differences, okay? And I think it's, first, a matter of scale. The United States is a superpower, whether Bulgaria is a peripheral country in Southeastern Europe. Second, it's also the question of the general culture and history. Well, Bulgaria is, a country with a recorded history of 1,300 years, and a society that has, for the most part of this history, been multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-linguistic. That's the correct word. And now things are, of course, similar to in some aspects to what's going on in the United States, because the neoliberal capitalism is a global phenomenon. But obviously, it's going to have some traits which are very peculiar for the region, for the culture, for the history, and for the society. One thing that is probably common is exactly this attempt to judge by the numbers, to judge by the quantity. And look, society, politics, statehood, this is not a quantitative thing. I mean, it does have to do with quantities, but for the most part, it's a qualitative phenomenon. All of them are. So this is how you have to look at it. I mean, you can't just play with numbers. You have to look at the processes.
Okay, so I think what Boyan said is very important, and I think he offered us very valuable insight from what's happening in Bulgaria. Now, I would like to emphasize 3 points here. First of all, the numbers. Well, the numbers are not the creation of the 3 decades of neoliberal policies. The numbers are the creation of the communist era. As much as progressive won't like it, you must take into account that in Eastern Europe, we gain rights that the British woman only dreamed of in 1945, for instance. And it was a common thing for women to enter labor force because the Communist Party and the communist parties in our country had this idea that you have to integrate women into the workforce, into the labor force, and then to socialize childcare and domestic labor. What do I mean by that? Offer them free access to, how do you call that? Preschool for young children, and offer them the possibilities to buy the food from restaurants, offer them the possibilities to somehow externalize, this type of domestic labor and child rearing. It is true that the communists never questioned the gender roles, never questioned that it was the task of the women to do all those things related to domestic labor and child rearing, but they offered them help. Okay, so we had access to healthcare, free education, daycare. This was the name that I was searching for, free daycare for young children. And it was very helpful, and free maternity leave. Okay, these were important things that women enjoyed as early as 1945. Now, what is also important that is that women were encouraged to enter the professions that you mentioned, like what you call in the United States STEM, that is science, okay, technology, and things related and generally related to a professions mainly dominated by men, and they were encouraged to go there, and they were encouraged to enter those professions. And this is why, for instance, in STEM, we have in Romania and Bulgaria like 20 to 25% of women, because they were encouraged to go there and to become engineers and to become, technicians and so on and so forth. So this is basically the result of decades where women were encouraged to get a higher education, to get into STEMs, to get into politics, to get into all those fields. It is not the result of 3 decades of neoliberalism. The first thing. The
It's
second,
despite of it. It's despite of it.
despite of it, because I'm getting to that now. The second thing is related to my experience in teaching in the New Bulgaria University. Like 2 years ago, I visited Bulgaria and I had the opportunity to teach there to teach a few classes there. And I had the opportunity to discuss with the people in the university and with the students. They had no feminist class in the whole university. No feminist class in the whole university. Can you imagine that? And they were so surprised to see that I was actually emphasizing the importance of the Istanbul Convention that was actually signed in 2011, and it is a very important document. Luckily, Romania signed it because we weren't so conservative back then, but the situation changed for the worst even in Romania, and the students were so reluctant, and the students were so conservative in terms of the Istanbul Convention, even though it is a very valuable piece of information, that piece of legislation that actually forces governments to collect data on domestic violence and provide support for the victims of domestic violence. So it is a document that is aimed at the government. And this is why it is so important, because once you sign it, you basically say that you are going to collect data and you are going to build shelters and you are going to help the victims of domestic violence. Okay. So they were against it because they thought that by what they call the sexual education, they would turn, once the Bulgarian government would sign this piece of legislation, they would somehow turn the Bulgarian children into homosexuals. That was their biggest.
I'd like to explain, elaborate a little bit on that later when you finish your thought, because it's a very.
Okay, so this is the second one, and it was quite, it was quite an interesting experience for me to see that coming from very young people, and this type of fear related to a piece of legislation that had, you can imagine, nothing to do with the so-called transformation of children into persons with a different sexual orientation. Okay. So this was the experience that I have, and this is why I say, because the Bulgaria didn't want to sign, that there were protests against the Istanbul Convention that was branded as some sort of perverse way of the European elites of corrupting the Bulgarian national spirit, and identity, and so on and so forth. And the third thing that I want to say, and I think I said that here on different occasions when I met with Boyan and other guests, that you have this type of soup perspective on feminism. Like, this politics is like a thing where you cook a soup and you add women and you stir, you mix. And you have to have them there as an ingredient, because otherwise, yes, as a spice, because otherwise you may run into trouble. So I find this very controversial and very naive, not to use strong words as Boyan did, but it's a very naive perspective on politics, and I think it is also very dangerous, because you may have people like Yelena Mizulina from Russia United in Russia that said that domestic violence should be decriminalized, and she actually said that, and she actually wrote a law. So people like her are the perfect example for this kind of women that not only are not feminist but are against the idea of feminism, and they are promoting pieces of legislation that are very controversial, to say the least. So these are the main things that I wanted to stress, because we also had an event where we invited Albena Azmanova, professor at Kent University, a professor who is from Bulgaria, that discussed this, the Kamala Harris success, and how everybody's so taken with the idea that now it's a very good time to be a feminist and a woman. And I really don't think that if you don't have, regulations and an explicit, overt, and clear, understanding of what those regulations might be and how would those regulations would benefit women, then there is nothing to cheer for. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and before you follow up, Boyan, I think that is I'm blown away, because that is like something that I want to shout from the rooftops here, because we have gotten into this discourse here in, especially in the United States, about like, oh well, like women, if we have a panel, then there have to be women. And it's like, of course, yes, like I absolutely want you to have women, and I think that representation matter, but it's not the only thing. And I think that we're missing that here in the United States. Like, I worry, because we're always saying like, well, the first, woman, or the first, person of color, the first Latina, or whatever. And we're getting stuck in this identity politics. And it's like, okay, that's good that you're of this identity, but what are you proposing? Like,
Yes.
that is the struggle that I had all the time when we had this disastrous primaries contest last year, and I was rooting for Bernie Sanders, which is like, center left, like totally, normal, like just basic human rights. It's like, oh, like we just want basic human rights, like health, like healthcare and things like that. And people are like, oh, but he's like an old white guy and this and that. And it's just like, I don't care. That's not okay. Sure, he's an old white guy, but he is pushing for policies that are feminist policies, that are going to help women, that are going to help families and immigrants and all these people that we care about. Like, I don't care what your identity is. Like, that needs to, yes, it's important, but as you have both explained, it can't be the only thing. And you can have people who are actively acting against precisely the group that they're supposed to be representing. So it's like, I'm just ugh, I'm so glad. But Boyan, I don't know if you wanted to make one last comment before we pivot to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, as regards
Right. I'd like
Bulgaria.
to I'd like to go back for, well, as for Kamala Harris, I can just say that Kamala Harris as vice president has just invaded Syria for the first time, which is, I'm crying, I'm touched, right? So like, it's the first female president has just bumped a nation halfway around the world from Washington. So, right, but I want to say a few words about the Istanbul Convention, because it's a very important document that I think was, discussed globally, but particularly in Europe, and was, and this is how things work today. And this is part of the civilizational downgrade I'm talking about, because it also results in a kind of cognitive disaster, massive cognitive disaster, because people, those students, for example, that Maria was talking to, I believe they have never read the document, and the only thing that they, the only way that their idea about it was shaped was through the media. And the media, they have actually, they really, they've done that. Like they kind of created an atmosphere among the people, among the public opinion thing, that it's something really dangerous that could disintegrate the Bulgarian family, and that could, indoctrinate kids to the point where their sexual orientation might be reverted, or things like, which is completely crazy. And then you go through the document and you find one little sentence there, one little sentence that they took out of this document of dozens of pages, all right? And they spinned it all around it, because it says that you have to pay special attention while monitoring domestic violence. You had to pay special attention to domestic violence related to some kind of LGBT, gender suppression, and so on and so forth. It's just one sentence, all right? But because of the general disaster, and because of this downgrade that I described in the beginning of our program, the society has lost its capacity largely to think critically, and accepts and became more and more agreeable, okay, to all kinds of right-wing, conspiratorial, bigoted nonsense, okay? And this process is this pathology is strengthening day by day, not only in Bulgaria but in many countries of Eastern Europe. And not only, of course, when we look at the United States, it's pretty much the same, actually.
Yeah, no, I definitely very, very good analysis and way to wrap that up. I wanted to mention another group of statistics that are not as glowing and bright as the ones that I had mentioned before, and it is about the demographics and economic situation of Bulgaria. So Sergei Sveraski, I might have butchered that name. Sergei Sveraski, director of the National Institute of Statistics, was saying that Bulgaria is currently in a situation of demographic catastrophe for many reasons, and he was saying that. And we see that the minimum wage in Bulgaria is around 333 euro a month before taxes, and according to a recent survey, about 3.8 million Bulgarians are living with that, month to month, while 1.5 million Bulgarians are making between 400 and 500 euro. Polling data shows that only 32% of Bulgarians think that their standard of living have improved since 1989. Simply, Bulgarians have a gloomy view on the matter of not being part of the other people in the region who know that their standards of living have supposedly vastly improved. Another excerpt that I thought was really impressive in the way that it describes this catastrophic situation is in Bulgaria, most of the people I know from my generation, the first generation to be born after the fall of communism, this is a direct quote, are living through the never-ending transition period with a shared sense of societal and national rot. This is not the result of being left behind, as the Guardian article argues, but rather the cold product of the material reality they find themselves in, one of soul-sucking and exploitative jobs, a prospectless future, and severe societal fracturing overseen by an oligarchy whose appetite for money and power seem unsatisfiable. There's also here a story about that they were talking to Ivailo, a 26-year-old man from Yambol, a city in southeast Bulgaria, revealing just that. He used to work night shifts as a gas station attendant. Recounting the day he signed his work contract, Ivailo said that he went to the manager's office to sign the 8 hours per night, 5 nights a week contract. After having signed it, the manager casually told him that he expects him to work from 6 in the afternoon to 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week. It's just the way things were at the gas station. He was told. Naturally, there was no discussion of overtime hours ever being paid, and if he didn't agree with it, he could just find work someplace else. I mean, this is capitalism today. Like, this is the essence of hyper capitalism, of this malaise, this deterioration of work standards, and its catastrophic effect on the population of these different countries. So what happened is, you hear this story of, well, the collapse of communism, and then they became capitalist and lived happily ever after. But like, this is clearly not the situation. So it honestly sounds very similar to what we hear all the time about our country, Venezuela. That everybody's like 5 million Venezuelans leaving, like they're scrambling everywhere in Latin America, and because of socialism, and it completely killed their country. But it's like, okay, well, what about Bulgaria? Like, what's going on there? And at the same time, and this is the digital nomad thing, which you might be able to mention or not, these Westerners who are able to work remotely, they are being, there's all these YouTubers saying, come to Bulgaria, you're going to find really cheap stuff and really cheap apartments, and it's going to be great. And you're going to be able to work from your computer, make your money in euros or make your money in dollars and have it deposited to your Western, whatever account, and live like a king in Bulgaria. And it's like, well, what the hell is happening with the people who were born and raised there? And some of these Westerners are running away from like the bad standard of livings that capitalism has pushed their cultures to the brink, and everybody's just on the go, super stressed out, and they're like, oh, I just want to go to Bulgaria and like be chill. And it's like, hey, what's happening? So with all that context, I mean, could you provide some sort of detail as far as like what happened, why, how has capitalism failed in Bulgaria, and what can we gather from that?
Right. Well, there are so many great questions here, but let me start with these nomads. Okay, I mean, people from the West invited to work in Bulgaria from their computer. For them, it's fantastic. I ran with a couple of colleagues a publishing house in Sofia, and before the pandemic, I used to travel to Sofia every month. Okay, and if you're a visitor, Bulgaria is fantastic. It's cheap. It's great food and so on and so forth. So if you want to stay there, and particularly if you like a country, if you're from a country like America, then for you it's even good. Maybe it's even better, because in Bulgaria, unlike in the United States, we do have a healthcare system that is based on the single payer mechanism. So if you work, if you're employed, if you pay your insurance one way or another, you're covered fully, okay, regardless of whether you break a leg or get cancer or whatever. So you're going to have that. And when when you're a person arriving there with such a perspective, then you just have no way to notice the downgrade that I was talking about in the beginning. In a way, the healthcare system used to be much better. I understand that for a person from United States, it might still appear better than the United States, but it's not it's just the initial impression that you're getting. Otherwise, you know, hundreds of hospitals and medical facilities have been shut down since 1989. Hundreds of schools have been shut down since 1989. And what they were replaced with private universities, for example, which is just diploma factories, basically. That's what they are, right? So the failure of capitalism in Bulgaria was really its beginning. Already in 1989, there were many indicators where things are going. Because to cut the long story short, the history of the restoration of capitalism in Bulgaria starts in the mid-80s with the coming of Mikhail Gorbachev to power in the Soviet Union, and the local bureaucracy, the Bulgarian one, I mean, was able to sniff out that some major changes, are ahead of them. So they started laying the ground for privatizing the national wealth, or at least, controlling it, being able to control it. And they started striking deals, mostly with, the top high-ranking Secret Service officers, in order to be able to hijack the country after, the Soviets pull out, basically, okay, simplifying it to the maximum. And that produced a lot of conflicts among the most demoralized part of the ruling elite at the time. because everybody wanted to grab as much as possible, and everybody wanted to outsmart the other guy, which resulted in straight up gangsterism, okay, in the beginning of the 90s, with political killings, with mafia mobs, shootings in the executions in the central squares of Sofia and other urban centers, and not only urban centers, actually in the villages as well, all over Bulgaria. So this was a very, so to say, primitive form of the primitive accumulation of capital, okay, as far as the capitalist restoration is concerned here. And that in turn produced an oligarchic class, which was pretty much the end of the transformation of, as I described them, the most demoralized part of the late Communist Party and the secret services. They became the oligarchs. They became the actual dictators of the internal political and economic process in Bulgaria. And in the 90s, at least until 1996, 1997, they didn't want to let it go. They didn't want to, let it go out of control. So they didn't do the same as they did in Poland, for example, or in some other countries in Eastern Europe, like, fully privatizing everything. They just wanted to keep it, to themselves, in order to be able to control it and to somehow exercise political and economic power. And as much as I don't like that model, I mean, the kind of oligarchically controlled capitalism, there was at least, some stabilization after the initial disaster in 1991, because in 1991, in February, so it's the 30th anniversary, I guess, right? Overnight, the price control was taken away. Overnight, the entire market was deregulated. Overnight, things were just blown up. Okay, the entire country, the work, the effort, the achievements of two generations of Bulgarians were just blown out. Okay, and they were totally destroyed. So in 1996 and 7, what happened when the situation, continued to deteriorate? We had these protests, you might have heard about them, which are pretty much the cutting edge of what we refer to now as colorful revolutions. And then we had a government which was totally, absolutely West-oriented and West subordinate, and full spectrum privatization was launched. And it led to some terrible things, like, for example, I have some statistics here as well. I'm not very good with numbers, like remembering numbers. That's why I had to write it down here. But for example, in 1999, the unemployment office funding, okay, was slashed from 7% of the budget to 1%. In 1997 only, 300,000 jobs were liquidated in 1 year. The wages, okay, the average wage in 1997 fell 3 times. Not by 3%, 3 times, okay? The minimum wage 4 times and a half. So we're really talking about a major disaster, okay?
They lost everything, basically.
Yeah.
They lost everything.
Yeah, they lost everything, and and the elite kept stealing. Okay, that's the basis of everything, because technically speaking, we're talking about capitalist restoration, capitalism in Bulgaria, and the results of capitalism. That's technically true, because we do have something that is referred to as free market. We don't have any kind of price control or anything like that. But in fact, when you look at it more closely, you will see that it's a very peculiar form of capitalism, a comprador capitalism, really, something that you're familiar with probably from, your area, Latin America, because those people who are at the top, they are completely obedient, to global powers that be, mostly Washington. Every major decision, literally, there's no exception to that rule. Every major decision has to be consulted, not even with the American ambassador in Sofia, but probably with one of the 5 press secretaries there. Okay, so this is it's like those people who are at the top in Bulgaria right now, they have no idea really about how to change the situation, how to reform the country, how to rule the country, how to manage the political process. The only thing they know is how to keep stealing. Okay, what they have been doing for the last 30 years is they have been stealing what the People's Republic of Bulgaria, the country I was born and the country that doesn't exist anymore, produced. Okay, and if you take away those people away from this environment and throw them for 5 minutes into some kind of capitalist competition situation, they will not last more than 30 seconds there. Okay, because they have no idea how to compete, how to do business, how to do all these things. It's just not happening. And the situation of the critical situation right now for us is, of course, that we have to endure this nightmare, this horror. Okay, as Lenin used to say, and I love this phrase: capitalism is nothing but horror without end. So we have to endure this horror, but for the ruling elites in Bulgaria, it's also critical because there's not so much to steal anymore. I'm actually, I'm amazed at the achievements of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. That there's been 30 years of rampant stealing and destruction, okay? And there still is something today, right? But now it's like, the resources have been stolen and there's not much to steal. And it's only thanks to the European Union that they keep surviving, because the European Union actually funds those, this degenerated gangster group, okay, by what is called European funding. Okay, there's this European funding. European Union gives some funding, and it's just pocket money for them. Okay, so they kind of can get that. But I also want to make one important point here, because you mentioned people that were born after 1989, and I think it's very, very sad what's happening with those people, and I feel so sorry for this generation. Because unlike them, I have seen a different reality. I was born in a country, and yeah, I know it's difficult to believe today, but I was born in a country that was industrialized, that was urbanized, that was developing, that was expanding its railway system and public transit communication, so on and so forth. That was investing in agriculture. In 1986, Bulgaria was, it even exceeded in terms of exporting tobacco of the United States for 1 year. It just became the global, tobacco producer and exporter. Okay, that's such a tiny territory. Okay, but because we had some elements of planned economy and rational governance, okay, we were able to compete with the United States, which has always been the top exporter of tobacco. Okay, so it's a very sad story, because I remember Bulgaria, which was not a perfect place, definitely. I don't want to even start discussing that, okay, about human rights abuses and all the issues of deficits of democracy, okay, in the regimes before, in the countries of Eastern Europe, of Eastern Bloc before 1989. But that was a different reality, and absolutely qualitatively, it was a different galaxy, okay? And those people that were born after 1989, unfortunately for them, this, the circumstances of an ongoing civilizational disaster is the normalcy. These situation is the norm. And I think it's a very big problem, because they don't have any experience that would be a point of reference for them to incentivize them to change things or to get engaged in order to change things, because they just take things as they are, and they think it's just how things are. That's life. That's the reality around us.
No, thank you. I just didn't know if Maria wanted to comment something, because right now we're going to transition. I don't know how radically, but we're going to talk about Romania. But you said just so many provocative things, Boyan, that we definitely have to bring you in for another one, because it's amazing how so many imperialist Venezuelan colonialists wannabe, I don't know, they would consider you a heretic, and they want to basically blow up everything that, as problematic as it is with Venezuela, there have been some amazing achievements, and they just want to blow everything away just because they want to be a colony of the US, because you have capitalism, dude, and that's the best in the world.
Yeah, that's I'm what can I say? There are people who are politically extremely ignorant and morally very disoriented, and that's the only comment I can make here after having heard what you just said about some of your fellas, okay, from Latin American countries, be it Venezuela or somewhere else.
I just want to say, in terms of the relations, because right now we are so deeply colonized that we know so much about Kamala Harris. And if I were to ask my students who Kamala Harris is, they would know, but I bet they don't know who Boyko Borisov is. So, and he's been ruling Bulgaria for quite a while. And this is also unfortunate, because before 1989, we were able to create some sort of, community, and to be in the same block, and to discuss and to be aware of what's happening with our neighbors, but not anymore. And this is why at the Barricade, we are trying to go against this current in the mainstream media, and to create some sort of community here, and to make people aware that it is very important to know what's going on here, with our neighbors, and not only to focus on this imperial power that is the United States.
Great. No, thank you so much for that, Maria. So, okay, let's just go into Romania. I don't want to abuse your time, so let's just try to compact it, but, just feel free to let me know if we're going too long. So Romania, for me, is a country that is very interesting for me. I had the opportunity to visit there a couple of times, and just some amazing statistics that I was able to prepare for this podcast. It's a country with the 7th fastest internet in the world, the home of, some people may know, pop stars Andrea Balan, Ina, beach paradises such as Costines, Pamabeke, the glamorous area of Bucharest called Lipscani, and of course, who can forget the notorious medalist Nadia Comaneci. And it's a country that is really entering into the European mainstream. A very nice urban middle class, driving the finest cars, and they speak different foreign languages. But if you look deeper, if you dig deeper, you can see that there are some rather troublesome tendencies. According to the 2017 UN estimate, about almost 4 million people, or 20% of the Romanian population, has emigrated. And what really got me shocked, I knew this statistic from before, but I think I sent it to you guys before we prepared this program, is that in April 2014, there was a sampling that said, a survey about 1,000 people, that 66% of Romanians then, they would vote again for Nicolae Ceausescu if he were to present himself in a new presidential elections. And in this moment, with that background, I just wanted to know, what were your impression, if this fake news or what? Because this is rather dramatic commentary back in 2014. I don't know if the situation has become worse or better, but I have the feeling, watching the amazing documentary Collective about this discotheque and what happened later in the hospitals, that, I mean, it's kind of depressing. And also, I want to ask you about some politicians in Romania, but first, with that, what do you think?
Well, I don't know where to start. Where, first of all, the situation was a little different in Romania that it was in Bulgaria because Ceausescu was a really special guy. I mean, you all heard of him. And I don't know, because I don't know the name of the dictators that were, or the rulers of Bulgaria by heart, but everybody heard of Ceausescu because he was kind of special. I mean, special is a very mild way of putting, and expressing his complete insanity and his ideas of transforming Romania in some sort of North Korea in terms of celebrations. I remember when I was young that I was forced to go to the town's stadium and just write with the other children, to stay like that because we had white shirts and we had to write the word peace, on the stadium and Ceausescu and stuff like that and sing all these songs. It was exactly, Kim Il-sen reloaded. And because he went there and he took inspiration, he thought, wow, this is great, let's reproduce that in Romania. And for many people it was horrible. I waited 8 years staying, in the main street of our main boulevard of our small town, waiting for him to pass with his car. And they made us stay there, all the pupils in schools, like 8 hours, to wait for him. Just to imagine how crazy things were. And they made us learn this poetry that was basically saying that he's the father of the nation and how we love him. And it was completely disgusting and insane, and it would take us years to
And
overcome.
Elena Ceausescu was also very
Of
special.
course, the mother of the nation, she was pretty horrible too. And of course, the Western powers were so hypocritical because they knew all these things. But when he went there and he took a loan for the IMF, but then he wanted to pay it back. And he paid it by torturing us and keeping us in the dark because we had no light, even in public. And we had only 2 hours of television, and it was kind of horrible. I mean, the last years were basically unbearable, and most of the people were pretty fed up with this kind of insanity. And they were, the sad thing is that they became fed up also with socialism, with communism, because all you heard while being kept in the dark, because he said that we have to rationalize, electricity because we had to pay back the IMF, it was a good idea, but the price was not paid by him or the security apparatus elite, but by us, by the citizens. Okay, and nobody asked us if you want to do that. Then, while kept in the dark, while staying, in a very cold apartment because he also wanted to rationalize energy, you were told on the TV that the socialism is great and we have so many great achievements, and you are being fed all that propaganda while you are living like, basically an animal in the cold, in the dark, and in the morning waking up at 5 o'clock to go to buy milk for your children. And the last years were quite horrible. People were fed up, and they were fed up also with this propaganda, the state propaganda. And that was very bad because it allowed, those who knew what capitalism was and were cynical enough to implement it in a way that was very detrimental for the people, to use this type of frustration that we got with socialism, to make us embark in this very dangerous, controversial, and detrimental thing that was post 1989 Romanian capitalism. We didn't have antibodies because, look, socialism is the twin brother of capitalism, and we didn't have, the antibodies and the ideological antibodies to fight and to understand what was happening to us. And that was very bad. And it had the roots, as I told you, in this type of authoritarian rule of Ceausescu. And that left us totally unprepared, and we were also very naive. I was just discussing with some of my guests that I had today the Caritas Experiment in 1993, I think it was. Everybody thought that it was so easy to get rich, and it was actually a Ponzi scheme. I mean, they told people that if you put money there, then you are going to get 8 times the sum that you invested. And a lot of people lost their homes. They lost their, everything that they had because they invested in that. It was one of the biggest and the most horrible social experiments because we were so incredibly naive. I remember that at the revolution we were crying and we were so enthusiastic because we thought that we were going to live at least as good as the top 1% in the United States. We actually believe that. It is no joke. I mean, we actually thought that the gates of heaven are going to open up for us. We actually believe that wholeheartedly, and everybody believed that. And if you were to say that, socialism is good, people would want to lynch you during those times, because that would mean going back to the thing that they abhorred, actually. And the destruction that followed was extremely harsh, because I will tell you one story that I told also Yuri Smuter that interviewed me about Romania. And it is, in a nutshell, this time of personal story expresses what happened here. In 1989, my father was working at a factory producing fur coats, and they were selling them to Russia because there is cold. It's very cold, and they had the capacity to produce 11,000 fur coats per day. There were 3,500 people hired, and my father was the technical manager there. But he was so fed up with socialism, and he truly believed in capitalism, that during those days, he basically, when the revolution started, he saw it on TV. So just imagine, he climbed the building, because it was written in metal, huge metal letters, the Socialist Republic of Romania. And by himself, it took him a whole day, he made the revolution by himself, taking down the word socialist. He fought and he finally succeeded to take down the word socialist out of that factory that doesn't exist anymore. Because by taking down that, he didn't realize, but he took down the whole factory. Of course, okay. The factory doesn't exist, as Boyan said here. There were people that stole it piece by piece. It was a transfer from the from a public factory into the private hands of gangsters, of people with very cynical individuals that took it down piece by piece. It doesn't exist anymore. Can you believe it? And this is in a nutshell what happened with a lot of factories. People were fed up with Ceausescu, and they thought that they are going, to enter a whole new era of prosperity. They believe this mantra of meritocracy, of competition, of a free market. I remember my parents discussing so enthusiastically about it. They never thought that we would end up in a situation where we have no industry, where we are not allowed by the European Union to subsidize the agriculture, and the whole agriculture sector is dead. And we ended up in a situation, because Romanians are very conservative. We rank number 1 in terms of Orthodox believers, for example. 65% of the population declared that they are Orthodox believers. They are very traditional. They are a rural population, and they love to cultivate, vegetables nearby. that doesn't happen anymore because they were able actually to win a living by doing that. Not anymore, because they went abroad. Because I'm getting now to the point of, to the part of, with the migration. They went abroad to work for nothing. And there are horrible stories, for instance, with the women working in Sicily. They are sexually abused, they are beaten up, they are treated like slaves there. So they went abroad. They even went abroad during the pandemic because the British needed their vegetables to be, and this is the situation. I mean, there were horror images with people during the lockdown, with people crammed together in buses going abroad to work in agricultures, Romanians, okay? And just imagine how crazy this whole European agriculture thing is organized, where you kill the agriculture in Romania, then you get people to work like slaves in the western part, and then you take the tomatoes from them and you sell it to Romania. Just imagine how crazy this is. Just
That's
to give you an
obscene.
example.
It's obscene. Like that
Yeah, I'd like to
makes me
speak a little bit about that if it's
physically like
possible.
angry to hear that. Like it's just
Yeah,
it's
and
incredible.
they destroyed the industry. We have no agriculture sector, and we have video chat, of course. It is a booming because we have educated girls, poor, with good internet connection, and we rank number one in video chat right now. Because the material conditions like create this type of social realities. And yeah, this is basically it. Is kind of depressing because they sold us. This is the last point that I want. Who is they? I mean, the European Union and also the intellectual elites, because we have the huge misfortune of having only right wingers in mainstream media and mainstream academia, and the mainstream intellectuals are hardcore right wingers. So they are the ones who sold this idea that migration is so good because finally these barbaric Romanians are going to go abroad and are going to get civilized by the European Union and are going to come home, civilized. You see, this was the narrative. Nobody thought that, okay, they send a lot of euros, like millions of euros home, but we have hundreds of thousands of children left here with the relatives. The suicide rates are spiking, the depression are soaring, the depression rates. And we even have what is called the Sokola phenomenon, women coming home and going to psychiatric facilities because they are so depressed and so destroyed by the hard working conditions they were subjected to. So very
Go ahead,
nice.
Boyan. Go ahead, Boyan, and then I will have a follow-up question.
Right. So, if you allow, just a very short comment, because Vanessa actually asked about that, but I kind of lost my train of thought at a certain point and wasn't able to perhaps follow up on that. But you also asked about the migration and the demographic disaster. So in Bulgaria, and I want to say that's pretty similar. Like Bulgaria and Romania in this respect, they are pretty similar. And in Bulgaria, probably what's most symbolic is the fact that in 1989, the population of Bulgaria was almost 10 million people. Okay, almost. We never hit the 10 million bar, but we were almost there. In 2000 and 2018, if I remember correctly, 18 or 19, the official population of Bulgaria on paper was 7 million people. But we're talking here about official statistics. Now, I don't know anyone who wouldn't have either a relative or a close friend working abroad in Bulgaria. And I don't know anyone who wouldn't know anyone like that. That means, at least according to some observations of some sociologists in Bulgaria, that means that effectively the population of Bulgaria is probably around 6 million people. That means we've lost about 40% of our society over the period of 30 years now without a single shot fired. And it's like it's like a result of a major war. This is what happens when you have a war, when you have a front, passing through your country, okay? And yet we had the results of war without a war, without a hot war where people kill each other, okay, with guns and stuff. But we had an economic war waged on Bulgaria, like you have, for example, an economic war waged on Venezuela, right, by American imperialism. Now, this process not only tore apart the entire fabric, okay, of society that was based on the feeling of community, that was based on self-help. And here, everything that Maria said about our rural culture, that's true, because we have always been rural societies with a lot of rural culture based socially. The social architecture and the architecture of the state, was based on the networks of villages, basically, okay, and the economy was based on the agriculture. Now, after 1945, what happened after the Second World War is we basically we cheated the history. In 20, 30 years, we've made strides, okay, in terms of civilizational progress, cultural, economic, social, whatever, that it took Western countries of Western Europe 200 years or 300 years, okay? Now, that was, of course, at least that's my evaluation, that was very good, because the entire population basically was restructured, was urbanized, was industrialized, was brought to, a whole new level, okay, in terms of education and in terms of I can give you stories even from my dad used to tell me, because he used to be a professional army officer for the most part of his professional life. And he said that in the beginning, okay, in the 60s, in the early 60s, the army in Bulgaria, it had a kind of, it played a civilizational role, because people that were forced, because the army service was compulsory, so they went to the army and they were taught how to clean properly their fingernails, for example, because they've never done it before, okay? So I'm talking about this kind of things that were happening there. It was a huge boost in terms of the development of society and stuff like that. So the problem, however, is that all this, that the entire process was managed from the top by the Communist Party that was basically following the Soviet model, okay? And the limitation here is that this development, once confronted with the situation of free for all, do whatever you like, take care of yourself, it can result in nothing else but an utter disaster. Because as Maria quite rightly described it, we had no antibodies. We didn't know. There's a famous Bulgarian movie about about the transition called I forgot the name in English. The kind of little yellow birds that you have in your cage sometimes at home, like they're like.
Is it the canary?
Canaries, yeah, exactly. So canaries out of the cage, which means that was pretty much the the Bulgarian society. Okay, they were, and what can you do? You're just gonna die eventually, because you have no idea how to sustain a life outside the cage, right? So this is important, but also the very last point I want to make here, and I think Maria kind of hinted at that. But look, the question of the European Union and our migrant workers there. Think about it that way, okay? Exactly from that perspective that Maria put forward here, because I think it's very valuable. This is exactly the role for us, for our educated people, for our engineers, for our professors, for our doctors, for our workers, for our, for everybody, okay? We are supposed to clean their hotels, pick their berries, change the diapers of their babies, change the diapers of their elderly family members in, the care homes all over the West. That's the role they designed for us. And as much as I'm not part of the so-called Eurosceptical right-wing community here, and I'm not there, absolutely. But I'm not the one to praise the European Union and the concept that it's so fantastic, and now it's the West who's going to enlighten us and give us the, ideas of freedom, democracy, and so on.
Let me
They
let me
did
let me
us
praise
like
it.
this,
Let me
but
praise
they
them
are
for a
not.
minute. Let me praise them for a minute and be try to be objective or play the devil's advocate. At the same time, I completely understand what you're saying, but Romanians did vote for joining the EU. So, somebody could say, yeah, but you wanted to be the cleaning and the cleaners and people who take care of elders in Western Europe. And that was your role. And you wanted to be part of NATO and you wanted to be a colony. You voted for it.
You
Yeah,
think
they
They could say
voted
that.
for it, but
somebody
they
told
were not
us
told
that?
that it's going to be like this. I mean, the people didn't
Well,
vote for
do
being
you think
expelled
my father
from
knew when he was taking down the word socialist that in like 25 years there would be no factory? Do you really think that we knew? For us, the Europe,
I said the devil's advocate. I said that.
but for us, let me explain why. Because for us, the European Union was heaven on earth. We really thought that we are going to live like, I don't know, Paris, downtown Paris. That was our representation,
No,
Brussels.
no, and actually, the first time that I visited Bucharest, you have the Arc de Triomphe in Bucharest. That's very nice. Yes.
Yes, we have it because we were under this influence, and we had during the 19th century the influence of the French elites, and we even spoke like French, and everybody in the elite was, very proud to be able to speak French. So that was a thing back then. Also, I wanted to say that we have a lot of common with Venezuela, and we are actually, I think in Europe, actually, I think we are the biggest consumers of telenovelas. And I've even understand perfectly, your language because I used to watch telenovelas when I was little. I grew up. I'm not watching that type of show anymore, but they were very popular. I mean, when they aired some kind of telenovelas that you produced, there was nobody on the street. All the Romanians were, like glued to their TVs and watching telenovelas. And I really think there are a lot of similarities also in this type of hierarchy, rural society, very strict gender roles, and a lot of things that are common to our societies.
Definitely, we should make another program about similarities. But I wanted to continue on another thing that I wanted to ask you. After Ceausescu, the revolution, that, I mean, it's just a complex topic that I don't think even in Romania people agree exactly on what happened. But today, and there is an excellent article about from Balkan Inside, and we'll put it on our podcast, that it says today, 9 security service, the heirs of the Securitate Colossus, they operate behind the scenes in Romania to manipulate politics and reach their members at the expense of ordinary Romanian. And I didn't know this, but it says that the main domestic security agency, the SRI, operates with a larger budget than that of Germany's equivalent or the Netherlands, comparable to population. So I thought that was really amazing. But I wanted to ask you specifically, Maria, what is the story with these two main politicians in Romania, Traian Băsescu on the right and Liviu Dragnea from Social Democrats in Romania? But I don't know if you can really characterize him like this. What do you think about this? And then we can talk to end the podcast about the elections in December. But tell me about Traian Băsescu and Liviu Dragnea, please, if you will.
Well, let me tell you first about those working in the security apparatus, because the problem in Romania was during those times, as I often tell the viewers, there was no dictatorship of the proletariat, but it was a dictatorship of the secret services that were completely out of control and, engaging and literally taking ordinary citizens and unleashing state violence against ordinary citizens just out of a whim of somebody getting upset with a colleague of work. It was pretty horrible. And now these people, of course, in 1991, the Romanian intelligence service was created. They created some sort of diversion saying that Hungary wants to steal the western part of the country. I mean, this is so ludicrous on its face. I mean, and so bizarre because they have like two districts, but they are somewhere in the center of Romania, and thinking that those people there are conspiring with Hungary and initiating this plan of taking the whole western part of Romania, which is basically ludicrous. And there were some jokes saying that, look, the Hungarians just struck a deal with the Bulgarians and they are going to give Bulgarians the western part just to make these people in the security apparatus upset. And well, this is how it went. And we have a huge security apparatus that it's basically no one knows how many people are hired there. I taught for several years in a security MA program, and I used to pose this question, and they were, "Why do you care? We are defending the nation. Why do you care how many of us are there? Because if we tell this thing, then this is a security risk, We can't tell how many of us are there. We can't tell how much money are we spending on this, because if we tell, then they are going to know just how much, and they are going to outspend us, and this was the paranoid. And we have to infiltrate the press, because if we don't do it, maybe the angels of Russia are going to do it, and we have to be there first, And you can imagine, it's like a bad joke, but this is how it is in Romania. And we have pretty traumatic experiences with these guys that are basically under no control, and they've been under no control for decades, because the parliamentary committee that is supposed to control them is a sham, because they control those people, because they have information on everybody. And if you raise your voice, there some bad things are going to happen to you, and you better keep it down, So this is basically it with the security apparatus. Now, these two fellows you intuited correctly. We have like three main people. That Ion Iliescu was the first that wanted to create in Romania a capitalism with a human face. That was his face, his phrase. He wanted capitalism with a human face. Then we had this Traian Băsescu. He stood in power for 10 years. And then we had Liviu Dragnea. Okay, so Traian Băsescu is the expression of the security apparatus, because before 1989 he worked there, and he admitted he was also an army officer. He worked in the Navy, in the Romanian Navy, for many years, and then he came to power with a very right-wing agenda, and he planted the seeds for hardcore right-wing policies and also a hardcore right-wing ideology. He invented, for instance, he's credited for coining the term socially assisted person, but in Romania because maybe we have that in English, but I can't translate the whole negative connotation that it has in Romania. He basically branded this term, and he basically created this social category where you can despise, because they are those people who deserve nothing. And he coined this very clever division between the hard-working Romanians working in the private sector. This is the thin man that is carrying on his shoulder the very fat man that is represented by those who work in the public sector. So he created this division between the hardworking Romanians that are basically supporting the lazy ones that are working in the public sector, and he also created this hatred, among social groups. I mean, the one that are being abused, because abuses do happen, as you can imagine, in Romania, because he also dismantled unions in 2012, and he made it compulsory to have like at least 20 persons in a union. If you have a small factory of 40 people, you have to get into your union like 50% of the people. Or if you have like 25, I don't know, or even 20, I don't know. How would you do that? Get the manager into the union? This is how absurd it gets. And so he was very clever in creating this type of social division and making people that are abused at work in the private sector hate the state, and scapegoating those who are working in the public sector. I mean, his presidency will be remembered in history as one of the most toxic ones, because he actually, he destroyed some basic and the little social solidarity that we had was basically destroyed by this individual. I mean, I cannot remember one single good thing that he did. Maybe he was the mayor of Bucharest, and at some point there were a lot of kiosks, in the streets, and he got rid of those. Let's say that from one point of view, that might have been a good thing, but even that is controversial. So this is Traian Băsescu. I mean, he came, when we were very much disgusted with the Social Democrats because they had this monopoly. And he's also made a deal with the secret services. During his time, the secret services thrived because he gave them a lot of money. He made a deal with the US Embassy and the secret services in Romania. And this is how he was able to compete and to beat up the Social Democrats, who were very powerful, a major political force that were basically relying on their local mayors and a very strong network of people, pretty much organized in some places in a mafia style, because they were looting the public resources. I mean, if you vote for me and you are loyal to the party, then I'm going to appoint you, I don't know, headmistress in this school, or I'm going to appoint you manager of the public transportation system or something like that. Okay. This is him. Now we come to a very interesting characters, because there were people from the elite. Ion Iliescu came from the elite. Traian Băsescu was a Navy officer, came from the elite. Now we go a little lower, because Liviu Dragnea came from a district in Romania, one of the poorest districts in Romania, Teleorman. And it is the poorest, and it was organized, as the way I told you, by the Social Democrats in a mafia style. Nothing moved there without his knowledge. He was the complete, ruler and owner. I mean, Teleorman was his manor, and he was the lord of the manor, okay? And
so like a caudillo then, hacienda.
Like that. So basically he was, El Padrino, as Italians used to say. And he was basically the one in charge there. So he climbed the hierarchy of the Social Democrats. Actually, he was friends at some point with Traian Băsescu. And he climbed the hierarchy, and he eventually got in the position of being the head of the Social Democrats. Now, he was involved in all sorts of schemes. At some point, he hired his wife to work for the child protection in Teleorman, and she didn't report for work, and he was tried for, he went to jail for that and for other things. But I think, this is very troubling. because he was involved in all sorts of very shady deals. And from all the shady and controversial deals and affairs and things that was involved in, that Liviu Dragnea was involved in, he was basically tried for this particular thing that is so minor, if you think about it. I mean, of course, it might seem like something. I mean, you hire your wife for the child protection and you steal from the public money that is supposed to go to the children. And it has some, moral. It is difficult to understand from this point of view, but at the same time, he was involved because he had a lot of money. What happened to that? Where are those money? Nobody knows. He was tried for this minor thing and also for somehow inciting people not to attend the elections. I mean, come on. He was a big shark. I mean, you come up with these things against him. And my intuition is that he had some businesses with some people that don't want to be, disturbed. And they want things to go smoothly. So they got him for a very minor thing. Now, what is also interesting about this guy is that actually he had some authoritarian tendencies. And he might have been the next Orban of Romania, like Viktor Orban for Hungary, because I think he was the first one to oppose US oil companies. Let me explain how. The oil companies wanted to drill the Black Sea because they found oil there. And they basically wrote the legislation allowing them to drill and giving Romania zilch. Okay. That was their pieces of legislation, like taking our resources and giving us nothing. So in the day that the legislation was supposed to be approved, that very day, and I mean the head of the major companies, US companies were there, and their PR, so interesting and bizarre to have these people in the Romanian parliament with such a law is, voted. He came with another law saying some different things. And I think this is one of the reasons why he is banned from entering the US, and even his son is banned for entering. And let me explain, like Liviu Dragnea was a horrible person, okay? Let's make no mistake about it. But he had this authoritarian tendencies, and he wanted, to fight back, and he wanted to gain more power, for himself or for his party. And he really thought that that might be possible because the Social Democrats back in 2017 won with a major, percentage of the votes. They had a huge electoral victory, and he thought, well, this is the time for me to, get in power and stay here forever. I don't think he had the best interest of Romanians at heart, but he wanted more power, and this is why he fought back. And he was the only one, I think, that also wanted to cut back the expenses of the security apparatus in Romania. He also fought against those people. And this is to his credit, even though I think his motivations were not so candid as one might think, because he's no Che Guevara. Let's make that clear. But yeah, he's in jail now, and they got rid of him, basically. And they have very obedient elites right now.
Fascinating description, Maria. And we're coming to a close, but I wanted to kind of emphasize on the election part, because I got the feeling, of course, as an outsider from far away, that this, I don't know, scandal from the collective documentary about the hospitals, we're gonna destroy the electoral base of the Social Democrat. And if you look at the election results, as you mentioned, they secured 30% of the vote, followed by the National Liberal Party with 25%. But I thought it was interesting that this far right alliance for Romanian Unity Party. They almost got like 10%, and they are anti-European, anti-globalization, anti-gay, and it's very interesting how the electoral base of Romania is evolving. But more interesting, especially from a Venezuelan point of view, is that we had the exact same participation rate in this election, because of COVID, because of everything, abstention rates, and the EU, the US, fraud, authoritarian, dictatorship, everything. And Romania got a complete pass, normal democracy, very good. How do you see that? How was that lived in Romania,
Well,
the
we have
December
opinion
date?
that leads to the US. This is why we get a free pass, because should it be the case that we had some leaders that do not obey, the Western powers, then things might be different in terms of how the media would represent what's happening here. Now, the problem is that, in my opinion, right now we have two political forces that are eating up the electoral base of the traditional parties. The Social Democrats are no socialists. Let's make that clear. I mean, they gave people some money, they gave some financial support for the doctors. That was important, I think, because right now during the pandemic, we had doctors, they were leaving the countries in huge numbers. So they raised their salaries, and this is to their credit. And I think it is good what they did, and they raised the minimum wage. But in terms of cultural values, I mean, no, they are traditional. And in 2018, for instance, they even supported the referendum for defining the family as the union between a man and a woman, because in the Romanian constitution, you have the union between spouses, and maybe the spouses can be men. Two men. Can you imagine what a disaster? Okay, so we had to have this, 20 million euros spent on a referendum just to define that, to make sure that nowhere in the near future would people with a different sexual orientation would have a family. Yeah. So these are the social democrats, very socialist, okay, and progressive thinkers. And they always had this type of cozy relation with the Orthodox Church, and they supported each other because the Romanian Orthodox Church is a very important institution. The clergy is paid by the state, and we have now this party our the Alliance for the Union of Romanians, that is, a combination of ex-Secret Service officers with Orthodox leaning, people, right-wingers who cry for and praise the legionnaires, the right-wing extreme force that we have here in Romania in the interwar period. They're an interesting mix, but they are eating up the Social Democrats because we had the protest of the miners and they were there. We had some protest of the unions and they are there. They are listening to the people and they are at least claiming to care about the people. And they are caring, about the traditional values. And as I told you, Romania is very conservative and they are very good at, using that to their advantage. So they are the ones who are eating up the electoral base of the Social Democrats. And we have the liberals who are somewhere in 1980s. They are still, for them is still rocking like 1985 with neoliberalism, privatize everything, individualism, meritocracy, free market, and all the rest. It's like the 40 years don't exist for them. They somehow, it's like they are being in some sort of time machine and they are being, transported from the 1980s. I'm telling you because I read their political platform that they have on their site. It's unbelievable. And they are being, they're being threatened and their electoral base is eaten by the Union Save Romania. Now, Union Save Romania are hardcore neoliberals, but I mean, right wingers, but with a corporate twist. They want to make Romania a corporation, and that they want the government would be like a firm, and they want to externalize even the government, to some private enterprise and to some private firms. And then it would be perfect in Romania because look, the corporation is working well, it is producing money. We should make Romania a corporation. Okay, this is their logic. And they have this corporate thing, and to their credit, just to say some good things about them also, to their credit, they managed to, at least in the first years when they ran for election, to get some people that were really serious, really devoted, they really wanted to change something in Romania, that were really smart. I think they were the ones and the single party that in 30 years managed to get some smart people and professionals into politics. They are right wingers, they have these crazy ideas, but at least they are accomplished professionals with very good intention. Of course, that changed, and now you have only crazy right wingers that had everything served on their plate and come from a very privileged position and are completely detached from reality. But for some years, they managed to bring into politics people with a different perspective and professionals. Okay, so this is basically the situation.
I know Vanessa is going to come with the conclusion, and there's just so many provocative things you just said that I just want to follow up, but it's already running too long, so we have to conclude. But in all of this, and I wanted to address this to Boyan so he can make the final remarks maybe. With all of this panorama that we're seeing in both countries, I mean, how, I just don't understand, for Romania or Bulgaria, just cannot understand. Even if the disaster, the corruption, the whole fairy tale that didn't work, how come they still believe in capitalism? I don't understand at all. Why?
Well, that's a fairy tale, as you defined it yourself. And, when you are in a situation of a child, then it's very difficult to stop believing in fairy tales. It could be Santa Claus, it could be anything else, okay? And look, 30 years is a lot of time, but at the same time, it's not so much time, okay? So I think that there is a prevailing feeling. I'm not sure about Romania, but there's a prevailing feeling all over Eastern Europe in general, but in Bulgaria, 100%, okay, that the transition failed. Okay, that it's a major failure. Now, the problem is that in order to get somewhere from the point of that conclusion, we need to have a debate. And in order to have a debate, you need the debating sides. And how are you going to have debating sides in Bulgaria, for example, where there virtually is no opposition media? I mean, except for maybe our website and a couple of others, okay? But in terms of major outlets, there is no opposition, okay? So that's number one. There is no debate about what's going on, where are we going, and so on and so forth. That's number two, is the weakness of the left. And I think it's a very important factor here, because we have some very basic ideological issues here on the left. Not only in Eastern Europe, it's a global problem, but in Eastern Europe, it's particularly visible because we cannot attach ourselves with the general emotion in the society, which is that the 30 years of capitalist experiments in our region have failed. And because we're afraid of of coming forward with that kind of statement, because of all the intimidation that Maria described, okay, that was piling up over the years. So, and because of our very problematic and very troubling, yet very strong attachment to liberal democratic, quote unquote, values, like, civic liberties, gay marriage, emancipatory topics, and so on and so forth, which do not resonate very well with our traditionally oriented societies. And I stress on that. Look, traditionally oriented society does have its problems, but liberally oriented society also has its problems. And I don't want to come across as a person saying that our societies are more ignorant or necessarily, I don't know, more primitive in some ways than the Western ones. I'm just saying we are different, okay? And by adopting some ideological trends and implementing them directly one for one, here on our, we're not going to go very far. Okay, so we've got the ban on honest debate, we've got the weakness of the left, and then we have this aggressive, very militant, well prepared, properly funded, disciplined, and organized right wing. Okay, and I'm talking here not about the right wing, the establishment kind of right wing. I'm talking about the people and organizations that are now largely referred to as right wing populists. Okay, so it could be the AUR party in Romania. It could be the GERB party in Bulgaria, which is the one being in power for the last, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. And you see, that's interesting, by the way, because look, our gangster prime minister has been in power for the last 15 years or something like that, and no one calls him a dictator because Angela Merkel likes him, because the American presidents like him. Okay, but for example, I don't know, Putin, who's been in power for 20 years, then he's a dictator, he's an evil person, the devil in the Kremlin there and stuff. So that's and in a situation like that, when you have no point of reference in the general political debate, which could be and should be the solid left wing, offering an alternative, not just offering things like, Maria said it, like the social democrats, the crazy conservative weirdos, okay, who on one hand they're gonna rise your salary a little bit, but on the other hand they're gonna, I don't know, push forward some idiotic referendums on who can marry whom, okay, and whether it's according to the constitution or not. So on one hand, you see that kind of stuff, and this sort of ideas about the left that, oh, we're going to rise your minimum wage, we're going to rise your pension, we're going to lower the retirement age, we're going to raise the minimum or hourly wage, we're going to do all these small cosmetic corrections in capitalism. That doesn't work anymore. Everyone can do that. The Polish hardcore, hardline, right-wing Catholic fundamentalists that have been in power for the last 6 years here, they have done that. You don't need to be a Marxist. You don't even need to be a right-wing social democrat to rise someone minimum wage. It's enough to kind of, think and kind of really want to be re-elected. So that's what you're going to do. And then, of course, there are these people like, for example, this Livia Dragnea, that Maria explained, who are these special personalities, okay, that actually want to grab power and they actually want to rule. That's something, regardless of what we think about Dragnea, but he seems to be one of the guys who wanted to rule, okay, not to obey the dictate of some, corporations from this or that country in the West. And same goes, for example, for Slobodan Milosevic, okay, in Yugoslavia. In 1995, when the Dayton agreements were signed, he was praised by Bill Clinton that he's the factor that is going to stabilize the Balkans. He's going to provide democracy. He's going to make sure that the well-being of people is looked after. All this stuff, right? And then 4 years later, he was the Hitler of the Balkans. Why? Well, because he said that, guys, okay, thanks, but I want to rule here, and that was it. Okay, so and that happened to there are many anecdotes like that over the last 30 years from our region. Look, it's going to be very difficult, and there's a lot of work ahead of us, and we cannot blame the society. Okay, because the society, in order to be blamed for making stupid choices, it's got to have one. And for now, the mechanism in place is that whatever party wins, the elections have been won. That's the situation. And that's really the nature, that's the essence of what is largely referred to as liberal democracy, which is, it 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 it, it just makes no sense in a further perspective in a capitalist environment, because you have no chance. Like in America, you have no chance to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. Yeah. Same as in Romania or in Poland or in Bulgaria, you pretty much have no interest, no choice to vote against the interests of the gangsters who have privatized the country 30 years ago to themselves or to their friends or through, various organizations that they had created. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, really.
Yeah. Um, yes. Thank you, man. That is a really sobering conclusion to a really high level, very good, very rich discussion of what has been going on in Bulgaria and in Romania, and how all of these different manifestations of capitalism actually have so much to do with how we see it spread throughout the world. We talk about at the beginning of the pandemic, we began to see a lot of graffiti saying capitalism is the virus, and you can see that how it affects the United States in a certain way, how it affects Western Europe and Eastern Europe and Latin America in so many different similar kinds of way, and how it's deteriorating our humanity and our societies, and how much work we still do have to do to move forward. And actually, one of the key things, like our little, in Spanish we say granito de arena, like our little piece of sand to really move this forward, is by creating a different narrative and different types of content. So I, before I close, I want to let our podcast listeners know that all of the work that Maria and Boyan are doing, in all the content and articles and analysis is available in English at thebarricade.online. I think that it's a really snazzy website, has tons of good pictures, good analysis, good media. And anything else that you want to say as far as how people can read your content?
Right. Well, the Barricade.online is definitely the main English language platform, and it's updated almost every day. Plus, I would like to invite your viewers and your listeners to visit our YouTube channel. It's also called The Barricade. It's still not that easy to find. You got to dig a little bit because of the algorithms of
Yeah.
YouTube. When you're a fresh member, content creator, then it takes a while for the mechanisms there to recognize you. Plus, we're now setting up a SoundCloud. We're in the process of setting up a SoundCloud account, and where we're going to upload the audios of our video auditions and various programs that we do. Quite recently, we started a podcast series by the name "Divided We Fall," where we discuss with I guess an expert, I should say, who is very knowledgeable about the history of the European left, where we discuss exactly the ideological and strategic problems facing the left today, and trying to find the explanation why are we where we actually are. I mean, somewhere on the fringes of the political process, unfortunately. So at least in the global north, okay? So, apart from that, we also have the Bulgarian language website, barricada.org, and then ro.barricada.org, which is the Romanian sisterly website of the Bulgarian one. And if I could just use the opportunity here to ask everyone who happens to like and enjoy the content that we produce, to go to our Patreon channel, patreon.com/the Barricade, because we're an independent media and we totally, absolutely depend on the donations from our readers. And I want to say that it's really, really important because we are a professional media outlet. That means we pay our journalists, we employ them properly. They've got, like, their healthcare and their pension system covered and everything. And, we don't sell anything. So we count on your generosity. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's so important to have independent media. So check the Barricade dot online out for the English language media site, and you can also find like all of their different links and sister websites and social media and all that good stuff. Well, once again, I just want to thank you, Boyan. Thank you, Maria. This has been a really, really good conversation. I think that for our US listeners, especially those who identify as leftists, we need to listen. We need to start breaking away from this toxic environment of like two-party system and like incrementalism and reforms. We need to start from the ground up and from the grassroots. And this is what we're doing a little bit, at least, creating some content and making people think. So you can find us at Contraelite1 on Twitter, on Instagram, and just Contraelite on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and also Anchor, which is where we host our program. So once again, thank you so much. I hope you have
Thank
a
you.
wonderful rest of the weekend, and we will see you later.